And he has done it before. He did win 2 in a row against Prague to make that comeback, Anish. What do you think now?
Yeah, I mean, chances maybe will be slim, but he just has to keep the tension. He has to keep believing, and he has to hope that Magnus Carlsen falls into the same trap that Prague did a couple of days ago of playing passively. Magnus, though, he's extremely experienced in these situations when he only needs a draw, and he's gone back to his favourite opening repertoire. It's the Sicilian defence. And this is a very trendy variation in something very similar. We saw a huge clash last season when Magnus sacrificed his queen against Giri and won a beautiful game. So, yeah, here we see Giri stepping forward with the pawn. He's already castled and rearranged his pieces on the first rank white. Now he's getting ready to step forward in the centre. But this is still quite well-known stuff, I believe.
Yep.
And we will see white gain space in the centre, but black now will strike back. There we go. We see a trade of pawns and locking down the middle of the board. If white steps forward now, we could see something reminiscent of the first game of the day with Anish Giri playing almost a French defence type structure. But, of course, white isn't obliged to step forward and commit there. White could stay a bit more flexible.
Yeah, and I have to say, pushing the pawn forward, though, is the most natural and the most popular move. And I suspect that Anish will play like that. Another alternative is just simply to develop the knight on b1, move it to c3, and Anish, well, he goes for the most natural-looking move, and now Magnus castles the king. And again, Anish has many options. He can develop the knight, as he's done. Another option was just to actually pick up the pawn in front of the king and move it 1 square, just to control the circuit of the knight sitting on g6.
Yeah, so although this game started as a Sicilian defence, it's essentially transposed into the French defence. At least the pawn structure in the middle of the board is blocked, just like it was in the first game, and that's where the players will be using pattern recognition. Remember, Magnus used the French defence in game 1, and this pawn structure arises from the French advance time and time again. So here it's all about whether black can break out. Black needs to fight against white's centre sooner rather than later. Otherwise, black's pieces are just very cramped. Black is just stuck on his first 2 or 3 ranks at the moment. While white's knights are coming forward, white will be able to bring bishops forward, pawns forward. It's up to Magnus in order to fight back. And I do like the opening choice by Giri, I've got to say. He's achieved everything he could hope to achieve against Magnus. He's got all the pieces on the board. There's only been a trade of 1 set of pawns and a lot of tension. Big questions for the Norwegian to answer.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm seeing an interesting battle between what has actually been played and the computer's top recommendation.
Oh.
So what has actually been played is like black has often felt very uncomfortable and just lashed out, just picked up the f-pawn and challenged white's pawn centre. But the computer isn't necessarily a fan of this approach, and it kind of is like, no, you're committing things too early, and instead actually recommends that Magnus should actually just play the knight to h4 and just say, let's trade off some pieces. But hardly anyone has ever played like this.
Oh.
Wow, yeah. I mean, it's not an obvious move to see because you've already moved this knight twice as black. To get it to this square, it looks like it's a decent defensive square, and then to move it for a 3rd time just to trade off for the opponent's knight. Yeah, it's not maybe intuitive. However, if you think logically, with this pawn structure, black is a bit cramped. These 2 pawns are further back than the 2 white pawns in the centre. Therefore, you're cramped, and you should be aiming to exchange pieces. That's the logic. If you have less space, swap off pieces. If you have more space, keep pawns, keep pieces on the board. But he doesn't go for either of those 2 ideas. The more I look at it, the more I think he should have done. He should have taken this opportunity to trade off, because after this bishop move, now the other idea that you mentioned, Jovanka, might come into effect. White could just step a pawn forward, and now this knight is never going anywhere. Into the white half especially, it's 2 squares are controlled, and Giri does find that move. Not only have you controlled the black knight, but you're getting ready to play the most trendy idea in modern chess. You're getting ready to push Harry the h-pawn forward, and there's a target for that pawn, this black knight. If it's kicked, it doesn't have any escape squares apart from in the corner. And I don't think you ever want to put the black knight in the corner of the board.
Yeah, it would take a special type of person to voluntarily put that knight there.
Knights on h8, you've got to hate.
Oh, very good, David. I have to say, the opening tree is telling me that black's most popular move is actually to break open the white pawn centre with f6. Another idea is actually just to develop the queen.
Now he does it.
And now he does it, yeah.
Yeah, I think he had to before it was too late, before he got steamrolled by the white pawn coming forward. So he had to put pressure on white centre. That's good chess wisdom again. And OK, after a trade of pawns, I was expecting the black bishop maybe to capture, just to put some pressure on white central pawn. But Magnus says no, he's going to take with the rook. And he might be lining up for something that we call a thematic exchange sacrifice in chess. If white gives enough time, for example, pushes a pawn, then sooner or later, Magnus could consider giving up his rook for a knight. I'm not sure whether you want to rush that now, but it is on the radar. The whole idea is, yes, you've given up a rook for knight, but you win white's central pawn. And long term, black has 2 pawns in the centre which could start marching down the board. Here, I still feel that white is active enough to have the advantage. On material, you're 1 point up, but watch out for that sacrifice later in the game.
Mm-hmm. I can tell you, David, no one. I mean, there only had been 3 games in the database, and not one person had taken that pawn with a rook. Everyone else had played the most natural move, which is bishop takes. And yeah, you can see that the bar is maybe not in favour of this whole choice.
Yeah. I really like white's position. I've got to say, I've played these positions my whole career from the white side. The reason I like white is because this is a weakness. It's a backward pawn. If you're careful, it will never, ever step forward. And if it doesn't step forward, then it's a clear target. But also, the square in front of it, we mentioned, this is a potential outpost for white's knights. If you can eliminate the 2 black knights, if you can somehow push these guys back or trade them off, perhaps, for white's bishops, then later on, white's knight has a perfect home in the centre of the board where it will control everything. So Magnus is the one playing dynamically. Long-term, black's position is riddled with weaknesses. And black will play dynamically in a fashion that we mentioned, either by sacrificing on the square or by maybe lining up with his queen along the f-file. He needs to play for the attack. White has an isolated pawn, but it's a very nice pawn controlling a lot of squares right now. So I'm expecting Giri to bring his bishop out to try and centralize all his pieces. Another move I would rush to play would be to put my bishop to defend this really loose piece on f3. And from there, you slowly start to build up. It's just about containing black's activity.
Yeah. I agree, David. And I've also played this type of position, and I've really hated it on the black side, because primarily it's all to do with that light square bishop that you mentioned. You know, it's such a bad piece. And Anish, he seems to be in a very direct mood today, and he's like, OK, I'm going to attack the rook. Rook takes a step back, and now we see a trade of bishops. So Anish is just saying, well, I'm going to just make those trades and make sure that those dark squares around the centre are terminally weak for you, Magnus.
Yep, and Giri's idea makes a lot of sense. It did cost a bit of time, but he's traded off white's potentially worse bishop. White's dark square bishop didn't have a safe home, didn't have an active post, so he's traded off that piece for black's dark square bishop, which covers that outpost that we mentioned on e5. So now, if you compare the remaining pieces on the board, white's light square bishop, good piece, controls a lot of squares, and black's light square bishop, a bad piece. The nightmare scenario for black here would be to be left in a good knight versus bad bishop scenario. So if black's knight disappeared, black would just be left with that horrible bishop, stuck defending its own pawns, unable to get active. And OK, Magnus dancing around with his knights meanwhile.
Is he in a little bit of trouble in this game, Magnus?
Positionally, strategically, he's in a lot of trouble, but he's active enough for now to compensate for that. So the problem for Giri is taking advantage of this situation. It's very much long-term. It will need a lot of accurate moves. It will need nerves of steel to control this for 20, 30 moves, and only then take advantage later.
I do feel that Magnus's activity is enough to kind of be slightly worse. Mm-hmm. And this pressure that Magnus has against white's d4 pawn is enough just to tie Anish's rooks down. And Magnus just making an improving move, giving a safe square to the king. Giri, well, he's playing by the textbook, centralizing his rook.
Yeah. He is unbeaten so far in the tournament. Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri will have to change that if he's going to win the match today. Magnus Carlsen's tour rating right now is 2891, and his performance rating is only 3,015 in this tournament.
Oh, only?
Slacking.
Yeah. Not quite God yet.
Well, that's incredible. Over 3,000 in performance rating with the top players in the world. Yeah. Incredible.
It's not as if he's just racking up wins against a bunch of bunnies. He's literally competing against the top rapid players, the top speed players in the world. And so far he's made it look very simple. I mean, it could have been more even. Magnus has let a few half-point slip here and there by a couple of careless moves. But yeah, he's looking very composed, very calm.
He's doing all the right things. He just knows what squares to put the pieces on. And whilst Anish is considering how he's going to try to maximize his position, well, we did ask today that our viewers share with us their favorite chess pictures. And Robert Dalton says, shows us one. There's a pawn starting at the bottom of the board.
Oh.
Ambition.
Yeah. You love the pawns.
We do definitely like that piece.
Yeah. Some nice pictures, you guys. Thank you so much for sharing, and keep them coming. Right now, it's Magnus Carlsen thinking. He's digging the music as well. We're going to go to San Francisco, where all the action is happening today. Tanya, are you guys having fun?
We're having so much fun because it looks like Magnus, for the first time, might be in a bit of trouble today. But can Anish actually crack this position or not? We'll find out. He's got to give it all he's got, because otherwise it's match over. And for all the chess discussions going on in our mix zone, we've got a special guest with us. It's a local chess enthusiast, and we've got Drew with us joining. Hey, Drew, how are you doing?
Hi there. How's it going?
Well, as you can see, it's quite a tense day here. Are you enjoying the chess?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's really great to see all these personalities in person for the first time. I've just got back to chess a couple of years ago, and already Magnus has been in the same room as me, so it's super exciting.
Who's your favorite chess player?
I'm gonna go with that's actually, I was not ready for that, but let's go with. I was just talking about Grishik recently, and he's a super entertaining player, and so yeah, he's probably. I'll put Grishik down for now.
Very interesting. I was thinking you were going to go with Wesley, considering he is the local hero right now, playing inside in that room right here.
Oh yeah, you know, Wesley's great, and it's super exciting that we get to have local talent here in the tournament, and it's definitely exciting chess here as well. So.
100%. And I have to ask you, I mean, there's so many strong chess players from the Bay Area. You've got Sam Shanklin, there's Christopher Yu, Daniel Naroditsky, but there's also a big casual chess scene here. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've actually started up this summer. A few of us have been playing a lot of park chess and playing for a couple hours on the weekend. And we have our own Discord, and people come play chess for 2 or 3 hours. And we've actually had people. There's a lady who's over 80 years old who grew up playing chess in Soviet Russia, and she plays with us. So there's another guy who played chess in prison and up in San Quentin, and he's out of prison now, and he comes and brings prison chess to the Virginia Green on the weekends, and so that's a lot of fun too. So good characters all around, and I've been meeting a lot of great people here in San Francisco playing chess.
So many cool stories. And Drew, finally, I want to ask you, who is the big chess hero for the chess community here in the Bay Area?
I would say Elliot Winslow from the is an IM in Tuesday Night Marathons, and he's done a great job annotating all of our classical games, and so a big shout out to him for all of his work that he does, putting together and annotating all of the games that we play every week at the Mechanics Institute on Tuesdays. So shout out to him.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Drew. Chess Fever is on in San Francisco.
Definitely seems like San Francisco is the place to be to play some interesting chess. I love the stories from Drew there, gathering a bunch of people, even 80 years old people who've been to prison to play chess. What a great game it is. Just gathering people all around the world.
Yeah, it breaks boundaries.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Magnus Carlsen, while we were chatting there, while Tanya was chatting, he's been thinking the whole time.
Wow.
4-minute think, and I really like this night retreat, I've got to say, Ivanka, from Anish Giri. Do you think Magnus was feeling the pressure?
Yeah, he's certainly anticipating what Anish is going to be doing next, because that knight has a purpose. You know, it's going to spring over to the f4 pawn and start prodding at some weak pawns there on e6, and also those light squares. And wow, Magnus reacts with that in a very direct way. He says, well, you cannot put your knight there, and I'm prepared to weaken my king. And I think this is quite a sensible choice, actually, because after all, white's pieces are all on the back row, so they're not going to attack the black king that easily. So, wow, I'm impressed.
Yeah, I'm very impressed too. I think Magnus had to choose this because, as you say, if he'd taken a timeout, maybe improved the white queen, then sooner or later the black knight is just going to leap forward, and the white knight, sorry, yeah, and I mean, there's ideas of attacking the queen. This pawn is eternally weak. This outpost in the center, you could plant one knight here. You could maybe later on plant the other knight there as well, just occupy this square. Now it's more difficult for Anish to kind of find the ideal squares for his pieces. This pawn push does also hint that you can threaten to kick away this knight over the next few moves. So I'm wondering whether Anish will stop this idea. Ideally, you want to maybe retreat the white knight and reroute it again back into the center. This is the dream destination for one of the two white knights. This is the outpost that can never, ever be challenged. But the problem is you do have to calculate, for example, a pawn being pushed. And now maybe this pawn in the center will be lost after the white knight has to move. So, also, there are ideas, for example, again, of the queen coming forward, some pressure on this pawn. So I'm just wondering, does Anish take a timeout here just to push a pawn to stop black from advancing any further? It feels a bit slow somehow. It's kind of a reluctant move if you play it. You don't really want to be reacting. You want to be the one initiating. So what can white play? It crossed my mind as well to push this pawn, but it looks too weakening.
Me too.
Maybe it's possible.
I must admit, David, I was thinking, well, if black can weaken the king, why can't white? And I push the knight back.
Yeah, kick this knight away. As soon as this knight retreats, at least there's less pressure on your central pawn, so you're more flexible. And the white knight, which we said was lacking a clear route into the center, at least you have a nice home for it. You don't really weaken your king in a way because, yes, you've pushed forward with your pawn, but you've got three great defensive pieces around the white king. And it's the black king which is lacking defenders. Yeah,
no, the more I'm looking at it, the more I'm thinking that this is the move that Anish should play.
Yeah.
Direct action.
I agree. And later on, you can kind of hint that you'll start chipping away, eroding black's pawn chain on this side. If the black pawns disappear, black's king is just completely open. It's, it looks very logical, actually, the more I look at it. But it does take a bit of courage. It's not a typical kind of everyday maneuver, just pushing your pawn forward. It's something that we saw on day one of this tournament with Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So, where they both pushed these pawns, and for a moment it was risky for both sides. But yeah, right now it looks very logical for Anish. I don't think he should waste time with any kind of cautious, preventative measures. I think it's time to take action now.
I agree, David. Now's time for active measures. It's not time to be waiting around. And
okay, he does wait, however, he drops his knight back. This makes a lot of sense long-term, strategically. You want to reroute your knight, but now there's serious pressure against this pawn in the middle. Now, maybe the moment has passed. As soon as the black queen comes forward, there's a three-piece attack on this pawn. It's defended 3 times as well, but it does mean that the white's pieces are tied down to the defense. You can never really step into the ideal central square with white either, because this pawn would just drop. So you can't find a route in.
Yeah. I do feel Magnus will just automatically make that queen move, because it's what every French player is taught. You know, you put the pressure on white's weak point. You fight white's activity with activity in return.
Yeah, and Magnus will put some pressure on this pawn. It does feel like Anish, he's playing it safe, but he's in a must-win situation, remember. And okay, Magnus doesn't play it safe. Okay, Magnus is the one taking risks suddenly. Instead of bringing the queen to a very nice defensive and active square, he pushes this pawn forward, kicking the white knight into the square it wanted to use anyway. And I mentioned that this is tempting for black because you can win white's central pawn, but suddenly black's king is very, very open. Suddenly black's pawns start to fall as well. And yeah, I'm worried here for Magnus's king. Knight takes pawn would be a threat. Okay, Anish, it feels like he's been given a second opportunity to get active. And right now, this is the position. I don't think you have time to take this pawn. Simply this pawn and this pawn, these two weaknesses in front of the black king, they're up for grabs immediately. You have to be really careful there.
All right, drama. Anish Giri, he has to win this game. Do you think he will?
After that move, maybe. If Magnus is forced to just trade off white's central knight, then that white knight is replaced by white's rook, and white's pieces are suddenly pouring forward. I mean, I said this was on the cards for black, but I think you needed to prepare it first.
Yeah.
It feels like Magnus just jumped the gun slightly.
I agree with you there, David. I'm surprised, actually. Wasn't a move I suspected, especially when Magnus just needs to draw to secure the match. Why play in such a risky fashion? And there you go, he captures the knight. It's just too dangerous to allow the white knight to capture the pawn. And now I'm just expecting rook takes knight, unless there's some tactical ploy, but there isn't.
Yeah, you definitely want to take with a piece on this central square, regain this black knight with a piece. If you take with the white pawn, yes, you solve the problem of your isolated pawn, but suddenly the white pieces will be blocked. White's rooks, white's queen. I think you need to maintain this outpost.
Yeah.
Take with a piece. Unless we're missing something, like you say, it has to be tactical. Strategically, you take back this knight instantly with the white rook. I mean, you want to maintain control over that square. Don't block up your own major pieces.
No, and it's also the way to fight against a weak pawn. The pawn on e6, that's a backward pawn. That is a sitting target. So you want to make sure you control the square in front of it with a piece. It's kind of like this Nimzovich saying, which is like control, you restrain, you destroy.
Yeah.
And we like our brutal terms in chess.
Yeah, and it's just so logical to take with the rook. Anish, okay, he's got a lot of time on the clock, but he spent a minute on maybe the most obvious recapture. I mean, this one is automatic. In blitz, if you give this Anish, this position to Anish, he'll play rook takes knight instantly, 1 second. I think if you give it to him in a bullet game, he'll play rook takes knight instantly. Why would you take with the pawn?
He must be brewing on a bigger plan then.
Yeah.
I think he's not trusting his instincts. Maybe it's because his confidence is a bit low after losing 2 games today already. He's second-guessing himself, and he could save this one nearly 2 minutes now. He could save that for later.
Yeah, for sure.
It's so surprising. White's rook can get active. Take that knight off the board.
I agree.
Don't understand.
I also don't understand either. I mean, I'm just looking at the computer assessments. Rook takes knight. That's a no-brainer. Pawn takes knight. You're just going to go back into equal territory. So don't do that. But why is Anish thinking?
Over 2 minutes. He's just frozen, and he's giving Magnus more time to think. Magnus was actually in a bit of time trouble already. Magnus has a lot of weaknesses to deal with, but Anish, by stopping for 2.5 minutes, he's really boosting Magnus's chances of holding this position. Let's jump in to explain why we're so confused, why we're so shocked right now. Black has just captured a knight on this square, and it's automatic. You just take with a rook. Later, this square can act as a launching pad either for white's rook, white's queen, white's knight. You want to save this outpost in front of a backward isolated pawn. You want to save it for later, this square. If you take with the white pawn, yes, you've solved the issue of your weakness on d4, but look at white's rook. It's just blocked by its own pawn. Look at white's queen and rook. They're just staring at a well-fortified pawn, and he does take with
He takes
the
a pawn.
It makes no logical sense. The only thing I can justify this pawn capture with is maybe long-term he wants to use his knight on this square, but black's covering that square with his own knight. Look at black's pieces. Suddenly they're pouring forward. This was not possible. Black's bishop is now active, but this was not possible if white had taken with his rook. The black bishop is eternally tied down to the defense of this weak pawn. Anish Giri, he's broken all the traditional rules we talk about there. You mentioned Nimzovich, Shivanka, who wrote a great book, who kind of formed modern positional chess understanding, and he's gone against all of that. Knight takes knight, pawn takes. Yes, he wants to get his knight in, but after this bishop move, he pushed his pawn forward. What is this knight doing? Suddenly, if it moves to either of these two squares, the black bishop, which is the worst piece on the board, would just trade itself off for the white knight happily, and black is left with a nice piece on f5.
Yeah.
And now Magnus is trading off queens. He's going towards the endgame. It's just all gone wrong for Anish. He's just, this is one of the most bemusing, confusing decisions I've ever seen, I must admit. Just in terms of strategy, the top players, they're also good at that part of the game normally.
Yeah.
Now, if the queens disappear, look at black's pieces. Black's rook is ready to enter the position. Black's knight, you can never, ever get rid of it. White's pieces are just passive.
And black has a protected pass pawn. Let's not forget that.
True. In the endgame, this is going to be a monster. You've just let it run. Earlier, it was blocked.
Yeah. It just seems to be the Magnus effect. Like, Anish somehow doesn't seem to be just playing in the way that we know that he can play.
And now it jumps up for Magnus.
And it's unsurprising. I mean, just take a look at black's pieces. They've just launched themselves forward. The rook is on its perfect line. I mean, there's like a sacrifice brewing on the f2 square. Oh.
And just the fact that the evaluation bar has shot up means that black has a winning move. And that can't be to do with just retreating your bishop. Anish has just attacked this bishop. If you step it back, probably black is still doing great, still with an active rook on this second line. But, I mean, just the fact that the evaluation bar shot up, oh, wow. OK, black has not just one winning move. That's the big shock. Black has 3 winning moves, at least, maybe even more. And it's all to do with moving this black knight out the way. The best move is apparently to sacrifice this knight for a pawn. Even if you just retreat this black knight, the second best move, you are winning. You can also give it up on a different square, but the whole idea is that you're crashing through. Remember the last game? Magnus, he crashed through on Anish's f7 square. Anish's f7 square as black in the previous game was the weakness. Now his f2 square is the weakness. Lightning has struck twice, and Magnus finds the best move. Of course he does. He doesn't even retreat his knight. He doesn't keep it safe. He gives up his knight for the pawn. And the whole idea is if the knight is captured, disaster. Rook takes pawn. Capitulation on the second rank. Breakthrough, and checkmate is coming.
Yeah.
The white bishop alone cannot hold the fort. If the white bishop retreats, the black queen just slides across, and she's going to join her 2 rooks. And this poor king is just completely cut off on the first rank. Look at black's rooks, the power of them.
And look at white's rooks.
Look at white's rooks.
I mean, look at the white's pieces all on the back row. This is... Anish is going to be so disappointed with the showing.
It turned so quickly. He had a dominant position with a natural move. Computer gave nearly +1 for white. 3-4 moves later, it says black is winning, and you're getting checkmated. So that's why you've got to follow strategy. You can't break the rules. You can't just freestyle. Can't just make things up as you go along, because you will get punished, especially against someone like Magnus. Anish still has 5.5 minutes on his clock. It's a bad day for him. It's the Magnus effect.
This could be Magnus Carlsen's 7th win in a row.
Wow. 3-0 yesterday, 3-0 today.
Yeah, and he also won game 3 on the day before that.
But it feels like in this one that maybe it wasn't necessarily Magnus's amazing play. It just feels like Anish just imploded. It all went wrong with him. He kind of somehow just had a very bad day at the office.
But this is the thing. So Anish, he's a great opening specialist. We know he's released several very successful chessable courses. He's taught this new generation how to play the opening. And the problem is he doesn't focus on the rest of his game as much. The top players, they play lots of blitz. They kind of solve lots of endgame studies. They work on endgames. And Anish, he's good at that stuff, of course. But game 1 today, he had a winning advantage against Magnus in the opening. A few moves later, he was lost. Game 2, he had a slight advantage as black in the opening. A few moves later, he was lost. Here, he had a clear advantage with white in the opening. 5 moves later, he's dead lost. It's like, it's clear what the weakness is. I mean, I've had patterns in my own career where I'm losing lots of games in the same way every time. It's always the middle game, always certain types of positions, always certain type of attacking opponents. And you have to work on these things. You can't just study the opening and say, OK, I'll survive the opening, I'll have an advantage out the opening. It's not enough. You need more.
I can understand the temptation, though, just working on what you're really good at.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I'll save the middle game for later.
Yeah. Well, someone described that kind of strategy to me as developing a claw. You know, you have a big claw that you just thump your opponents with. You know, that could be your opening, could be your endgame, could be your grinding. And then, you know, and you work on this until you become the best in the world. That's one strategy. But as David says, it does leave you open up to other aspects of the game. And here, I suspect my explanation for why things turned out this way for Anish is because he wanted to win so much. He really wanted to give Magnus a big fight. And if you look at a lot of his errors in these last 3 games, they've been forced errors. You know, by forced errors, I mean that he's been forcing moves. He's been very direct. He's been forcing Magnus to fight in a certain way. And that just hasn't worked out.
Yeah, and in a way, Magnus has sussed him out, Anish. Magnus's score against Anish in recent years is just huge. So he knows Anish's psychological weaknesses. He knows his tendencies, his preferences. And remember, at the top level, they've used that word themselves in interviews, universal. You have to be able to play all types of positions, all types of openings, and make all types of decisions according to the one moment. But Anish, he's trying to follow this template of success, which just doesn't work against the likes of Magnus. It works against 99.9% of chess players, but at the very top level, yeah, it's just, I think that's one area of his game. If I were his coach, at least, I would say, okay, yes, you're great in the openings. You don't need to work on that anymore. You've mastered it. Just work on kind of middle game decisions, strategic decisions, playing on the front foot, putting these players under long-term pressure, not just forcing them to find good moves. Like you said, Anish has forced Magnus to find these good moves. It's not as if he made it difficult. It's not as if he said, okay, you've got a narrow path, you have to find an only move to survive. No, Magnus had plenty of winning opportunities, as we saw in that last turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can see the look on Anish's face as he contemplates his position and wonders how can he survive, but he cannot survive this position. It's just in tatters.
Yeah, and I feel harsh, but I was going to maybe show, let's bring up the analysis board just while Anish ponders whether to resign or not. But I was going to show just the endgame of the last battle between these two. So this was the final position of game 2. If you remember, he resigned here because White's rooks are crashing in on this f7 square. And now let's flick through to the current position. And he's about to resign now because Black's rooks are coming in, to crash through on the f2 square. So it's basically the same pattern. Yes, this is more complicated with more pieces on the board, more complicated middle game, but it's the same pattern. It's just the same weakness, just with colours reversed. So Magnus has pinpointed, the weak spot in the enemy camp, and he's about to crash through. The problem is you can't defend this pawn. There's literally no way to defend it, and you have a choice of 2 pieces to take, this bishop or this knight, but no matter which piece, rook takes pawn, and you can never allow 2 rooks to form a battery like this along the second rank. They're targeting the bishop. The bishop has no safe squares. And it's going to be checkmate any moment.
Yeah.
And let's go back to Anish. It looks like he put his hand on his mouse. He's about to make a move. Or is he about to click the resign button? Because it is that hopeless.
I think we're going to have to use Simon's tagline, just resign now. I mean, the problem is, okay, he takes the bishop, but we're fully expecting Magnus to pick up his rook on f8 and capture the pawn on f2 and just ask the question to Anish, what are you going to do about your bishop?
Yeah, and Magnus leaning forward. It looks like he was getting ready to celebrate this victory. Anish down at 30 seconds as well. He throws his knight in the way, but this won't save the day. This knight can be captured by the black rooks. It can even be captured by black's knight, I think. I mean, you're giving up material here, if anything. So black will be up on material and attacking.
Looks like
plus 21.
Yeah. Looks like it's going to be a short day again for, well, both of them. Magnus Carlsen about to win game 3 out of 3 against Anish Giri. Anish Giri struggling here really today and also yesterday. He is the king of Twitter though, and he is great at selfies. And we are asking you guys to share chess pictures and chess selfies. How are you watching the show? Who are you watching with? Maybe you are together with some friends. Maybe you are at school. Maybe you're at work. What are you doing? We want to see how you guys are following the chess. So please share using #ChessChamps on Twitter.
And if you're watching from school, please do it during your break time. We don't want you to get into trouble.
Chess is never trouble. Chess is always a good idea.
I saw a very cool picture this morning on Twitter where someone was at a concert and the person in front of them was playing chess.
I have a feeling they didn't spend their own money on tickets for that concert.
And there we see the rook capture the knight.
Yeah, this is the safe approach. I was expecting Magnus to go for something a bit more flashy. At least now one of the rooks can be removed from the board, so there won't be that immediate breakthrough against the white king. Okay, Anish has kind of tricked Magnus in a small way. That was very clever by Anish to survive, but the problem is you're not surviving for long. Now, rather than the second rank breakthrough, it's going to be the first rank. Black's rook challenging White's rook. You cannot take now. You cannot trade off those rooks because Black's queen would swoop down, recapture, and that would end in checkmate on rank 1. So, okay, everything disappears, and at the very end, Black's going to be a few pawns up.
Yeah, he's so clinical. He's not giving Anish a single chance. And bearing in mind that Anish is in a must-win situation, he's just put that nail in the coffin.
Yeah, we will see everything get exchanged. The queens are about to disappear. Magnus will emerge 3 pawns ahead, and Anish throws in the towel and resigns.
Handshake. 3 wins for Magnus, and it's over. He wins the match. Horrible day for Anish Giri in San Francisco, but Magnus Carlsen is on fire. His 7th win in a row with a performance rating way above 3,000.